What's up, everybody? This is the Booch, and welcome to episode 15 of the Boochcast reviews, Darkside of the Ring. We've got a great one for you guys. This one is, it's got some tragedy, but it's also very, very entertaining as well. This one is, of course, the last ride of the Road Warriors, and this is definitely an emotional one to check out, especially if you're a diehard fan of the Road Warriors, especially since when this episode was aired on Vice at the time, Road Warrior Animal was still alive. So he's actually in this documentary talking about the experience of the Road Warriors. And I'm glad that at least one of them was around to talk about it. In a perfect world, both of them would have been around to talk about it, but at least Animal got to tell his side of the story. So before we kick into this, I do want to give a special shout out to the memory of Road Warrior Animal, Joe Laurinaitis. I want to say, rest in peace to Road Warrior Animal. And of course, if you guys, for those of you who may not know, back in the day, I used to do a podcast with Buff Bagwell. We called it the Buff and Boochcast. And one of the guests that we had on our show was Road Warrior Animal. So in honor of Road Warrior Animal, to pay tribute to him, when you check the links in the description box for our podcast hosting sites, Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, and Google Podcast, instead of providing a link to the actual website, we are going to be providing links to the Road Warrior Animal interview. So all 4 links for our podcast hosting sites will take you directly to the interview that we did with Road Warrior Animal. So you can listen to the interview on your favorite hosting site. And after, if you enjoy that interview and you wish to follow us on those hosting sites to check out the rest of our podcast and the rest of the content we put out, feel free to do so. We hope you guys will. But in honor of Road Warrior Animal, we are providing podcast hosting links to the Road Warrior Animal interview for you guys to check out. But obviously, check that out after you watch this video. So with that being said, we are going to get it started. Last ride of the Road Warrior. So this, of course, chronicles the career of the Road Warriors from their introduction into wrestling to the downfall of the tag team. The Road Warriors are arguably the greatest tag team of all time, although a lot of people are still waiting for the argument against that. They are regarded as, legends in tag team wrestling. They had a legacy that is often imitated but will never be duplicated. They had the look, they had the power, and they put it all together. It was the total package, the Road Warriors. From the face paint to the shoulder pads, and they were jacked to the sky. They trained their asses off, and they hit the ring like badasses. They were 2 badasses trying to be wrestlers, while their opponents were wrestlers trying to be badasses. They were compared to the guys in Mad Max, and were said to be even meaner, which is a big deal in wrestling. Like, they didn't have to pretend to be badasses. They were badasses. What you saw in the ring was what they were like outside the ring, just the dial turned up like most great wrestlers are. Now, in the history of pro wrestling, no duo has dominated the ring like Hawk and Animal, a.k.a. the Road Warriors. In Japan, they were compared to Godzilla. You look at them and you were like, holy shit, I hope they don't kill me. They were legitimate tough guys. They clawed their way to the top, becoming one of wrestling's biggest attractions. But an unrelenting lifestyle for Hawk ultimately led to their downfall. They partied hard, they played hard, and they lived hard. The switch would flip after the match, and bam, it becomes a way out as well as an escape. The road can eat you alive. Hawk died of a heart attack at the age of 46. An Animal cried like a baby when he heard the news. He was his friend, and he went through hell and back with him. And that is true. If you're a performer on the road can be strenuous. It can stress you out. It can eat you alive. And that's the case whether you're a wrestler, a musician, a comedian. It takes a toll on your body and your psyche, especially if you have a family and you're away from them for so long. Now, the art of tag team wrestling engages fans in a dynamic, far more complex way than one-on-one matches. The greatest tag team duos in history share a sixth sense, operating as two halves of one whole. There's no one without the other, and no team proves that more than Mike Hawk Eggstrand and Joe Animal Laurinaitis. And that is the most honest thing you can say about tag teams. That's why tag team wrestling is not as great as it used to be. Because the secret to being a great tag team is to wrestle in a way to where it looks like one team is trying to beat another team instead of watching a tag team match where you're basically seeing two singles matches. Two guys go in the ring, do a bunch of spots, tag out, the other guys come in, do a bunch of spots. That's not tag team wrestling. In fact, the only time a tag team should operate like that is if it's two people that are being thrown together for the sake of one match. Like, let's say there's a match with, like, you know, Austin and The Rock versus Triple H and Rikishi. Those are not normal tag teams. But they're being thrown together because they're in a rivalry with the other two people. So they would do that. Obviously, Austin and Rock can go out there and have singles matches and then tag, and the other guy comes in, does a single match spot. It works in that dynamic. But if you're trying to be a real tag team, like the Road Warriors, like the Dudley Boys, like the Hardy Boys, you've got to be able to operate like that. Two halves of one whole. One cannot last without the other. That's what makes a true tag team. You got to look alike. You got to dress alike. Your promos have to be done in a way to where it seems like both of you are talking at once. Like one person talks, the other person picks it up. You know, there's got to be a rhythm to it. There's a whole art form attached to tag team wrestling. And it's an art form that not a lot of people can perfect. That's why there's some tag teams who are great and some who aren't. Like Harlem Heat, like the Nasty Boys, the Hart Foundation, Demolition. Those are tag teams that understood the art form and made it great. In an era dominated by iconic personalities whose singles matches were the star attraction, the Road Warriors would break the mold as comic book heroes come to life and post-apocalyptic warriors beyond the realms of Earth. Their larger-than-life personas propelled them to main event status around the world, winning titles wherever they went. In fact, with the exception of the Dudley Boys, no other tag team has acquired championship titles in every promotion they've been in, just about. They've been the NWA World Tag Team Champions. They were the WWE Tag Team Champions. They won titles in Japan and in the AWA, World of Japan Pro Wrestling. Like, these guys won tag team titles everywhere they went. And they were at the main event level in every show they were in, just about. So it's rare for tag teams to be the main event of anything. In fact, the only other tag team that was truly a main event tag team as a team that main evented pay-per-views was like maybe the Dudley Boys. Outside of that, you didn't see it often, where a tag team was the main event and the star attraction. But the price for success is often high, and both men paid a heavy cost, and their wrestling brotherhood met a heartbreaking end. And of course, we're going to describe what that is later in the show. Obviously, it's with Hawk passing away, but Animal says that tag team wrestling is the most interesting part of the wrestling business. Tag team wrestling is an art. It's a four-person athletic dance. And ironically, Bubba Ray Dudley said that's why he got into tag team wrestling. Like, Bubba Ray always wanted to be a tag team wrestler. He never once thought about being a singles guy until way later in his career when the opportunity presented itself. Now, according to Barry Darsow, who most fans know as the Repo Man and Smash from Demolition, he says, there's more of a story to be told with the tag team wrestling than there is the single wrestling. You can't just put two guys together and make them a tag team. You have to have two guys who really know each other. He said they had incredible matches with the Road Warriors. What made them successful was they were two guys that really clicked. Everybody believed that they could beat anybody, and they looked incredible. And that is so true. Very rarely have two people been thrown together randomly and became a successful tag team. In fact, the only group I can think of that even came close to that was maybe Beer Money. Like Bobby Roode and James Storm got thrown together as a team one day and they found a way to click and make it work. But that doesn't happen often. Usually you have to know the person inside and out. You got to know what the other person's thinking. You got to know what they're going to do. You got to be able to click on every wavelength to be a great tag team. And that's why the best tag teams are guys who came into the business as a tag team or two people who just really sat down and worked on it. Like, they weren't a tag team when they first broke in. They were probably singles guys that got thrown together, but they sat down and worked. That's why as a tag team, you got to train together. You got to travel together. You got to talk. You got to strategize. You got to come up with a gimmick together. You guys have to be so close and have such a strong bond that when you go out to the ring, people believe you're a team. You got to be closer with your tag team partner than you are with your wife. He has to know you better than your wife knows you, which is scary, I know, but very necessary. Paul Ellering, who was a manager for the Road Warriors, and as most modern fans know, he was a former manager for the Authors of Pain in NXT, he said he saw the it factor in both Animal and Hawk. They were a group that came along once in a generation, and they are always copied but never duplicated, as I mentioned before. And, of course, the best example of that is, of course, the Ascension kind of gimmicked the Road Warriors, and they also insulted the Road Warriors, which ultimately led to them getting buried by legends week after week after week because nobody wanted to put them over after that, which was stupid because they were heels out there getting heat. And also, the Ascension, before they got called to the main roster, they were a badass tag team in NXT. But anyway, it's another story for another day. So, Animal and Hawk were two no-nonsense badasses. Hawk was the off-the-wall flyer guy, and Animal was the brawler and ass kicker. So you had them doing both. Hawk would do the high spots, and Animal would do the psychology. And the buck stopped with him, with Animal, because Animal was the voice of reason, while Hawk went fucking off the rails. Most tag teams had one big guy and one little guy. These guys were two freaking monsters. And according to Nikita Koloff, they could do things in the ring that prior to them, big guys didn't do. It was the chemistry of the tag team that made it work. Like their finisher, the Doomsday Device, where I think it was Animal would have the opponent on their shoulders, and Hawk would come down off the top rope with a vicious clothesline. For decades, it was the ultimate finish in wrestling. You got hit with that move, you didn't get up, and you didn't kick out. And there are certain finishes that are like that. You know, because back then, wrestlers protected their finishers. Very seldom did anyone kick out of a finish like that. Once you got hit with that move, you do not get up. Someone has to help you up. And if you get pinned, it's 1, 2, 3. Yo ass ain't kicking out. Someone might come in and break up the pin, but you're not kicking out. Hawk and Animal knew what each other was thinking all the time, but sometimes Animal knew more than Hawk as far as what was going on. Animal was much more patient than Hawk was, which, if you met Animal, you know that might be a little bit hard to believe, but it was the case. Animal was a lot more patient. Now, Animal was 18 when he met Hawk. He knew his reputation for being a loose cannon and a tough guy. They grew up in northeast Minneapolis, which was a tough working-class neighborhood. And they met in 1977 in Jesse Ventura's gym. So apparently Jesse Ventura back in the day used to own a gym. And they would, work out there because Jesse Ventura is very big in Minnesota. So they met. Animal was in the gym one day, bench pressing 315 pounds. When in the middle of his set, he gets whacked in the chest really hard. And the guy says, "Laurinaitis, you ain't right. You should be lifting more weights than me." That was Hawk. And that was how they met. In school, Hawk was voted class bully. He was known for being a scrapper, and his idea of a good time was beating up people. Stay away from him, he'll be a great friend to you, but don't cross him. His brother described him as a lost soul as far as what he was going to do with his life, and around that time, his mom passed away. So he wasn't quite sure what to do with his life, and having that happen fucked with him emotionally. He was hyperactive and he didn't sit still. Even if he sat down, his leg would be bouncing up and down, which is kind of funny because I do that all the time. Literally, if I'm sitting down, I'll sometimes be in a situation where my leg will just start bouncing up and down if I'm hyperactive and really don't want to sit. Now, Scott Norton, who, side note, that's another person we interviewed back in the day. I don't have that episode uploaded yet, but at some point I'll be putting it up the next time we go on hiatus. Now, if I do ever upload this interview, just know it'll be pinned in the comment section of this video. I'll have it as the top pinned comment. You'll be able to see it there. So if you don't see it there, it's not uploaded yet. If you see it down there, it's up there. So Scott Norton also grew up in this area, but on the other side of the tracks. Hawk was the toughest kid on his side, and Scott was the toughest kid on his side. Hawk beat up anybody that stepped to him and conditioned himself up by punching himself in the face and damn near broke his own face. So if he's willing to break his own face, imagine what he'd do to yours. This hard-hitting lifestyle served as a training ground for their careers in the ring, and their circle of friends soon expands to include a massively talented roster of future superstars. Because Minneapolis was a mecca of guys who ended up in the crazy, wacky world of professional wrestling. For example, as we all know, Jesse the Body Ventura was from Minneapolis, but he didn't grow up with the Mr. Perfect Kurt Hennig, John Nord, Barry Darsow, Nikita Koloff, Rick Rude, Scott Norton, the Road Warriors, just to name a few. These guys all knew each other, and they got closer as Hawk would ask Animal to fill in, working at this bar called Grandma B's down in Minneapolis. Now, Grandma B's was one of Minneapolis' toughest bars, and it's where Animal and Hawk got the chance to cut their teeth. And by that, I mean be able to scrap and brawl and do a bunch of other things. They were able to pay the bills, and it was a perfect outlet for them as they got into a lot of brawls, and they loved to fight. Also, the owner of the bar sold coke, and this one guy owed him a lot of money. He sent Hawk and Animal to take care of it. They grabbed each leg and hung him over the Franklin Avenue Bridge. They said, "Listen, man, you need to frickin' pay up." The guy paid up. The bar was a strip bar in the afternoon, and they always had wet t-shirt contests, and it drew some of the worst guys into the bar. Every night, something happened. The bartender was a wrestler named Ed Sharkey. He wrestled for Vern Gagne in the AWA. He approached Animal and Hawk and said he was going to open a wrestling school and if they wanted to train to be wrestlers. At first, they weren't sure if they wanted to do it, but then they thought, well, what could it hurt? Let's give it a try. So Ed Sharkey started on the carnival circuit. And I talked a little bit about the carnival circuit on the, Slap Heard Around the World. So some of you, if you watched that episode already, you kind of know what I mean by carnival circuit. Those that don't know what that means, you can go back and watch that episode as well. And so he started on the carnival circuit and spends his career as a wrestler, referee, promoter, trainer, and as we say on our classic pay-per-view reviews, he pretty much had the wrestling business covered. The school was in the basement of a church in northeast Minneapolis. He used a boxing ring to train. Sharkey would critique, but never got out of his chair, and on the rare moments where he did, he would say, "Don't try a suplex or anything crazy while I'm gone." Now, the problem is, Eddie had not smartened these guys up to the business yet, so he never taught the guys how to throw a working punch. So they would literally punch the fuck out of each other. It wasn't until way later into the training that he eventually smartened them up. Because as I mentioned before in the, Slap Heard Around the World, they waited till they thought you were ready to truly join the business before they smartened you up and told you it was a work. So one night at the bar, Animal dealt with someone who was misbehaving, and he grabbed the dude's collar in his belt loop and threw him out of the bar, and he landed right at the shoes of Ole Anderson. Ole was so impressed, he brought them down to Atlanta. Animal was the only one that got brought into the Georgia territory. Meanwhile, Hawk was being scouted by another promotion. He went to work for Al Tomko up in Canada. So when they finally get into the business, they're not a team. They're singles guys. Meanwhile, Animal's in Georgia under the name Road Warrior. His original gimmick looked like a giant version of the Village People, and he was just Road Warrior. Wasn't even Animal, just Road Warrior. At the time, Animal had a wife and kid, because he got his girlfriend pregnant and he married her. He was wrestling 9 times a week, making $150 total in the beginning. So basically, 9 wrestling matches added up to $150. He sent the money back home to his wife. He lost 50 pounds of body weight because he couldn't live off of what he was making in the business, so he couldn't eat as much. Hawk was in a similar situation, just without the wife and kids. They both eventually left the business and came back to Minnesota because they realized they made more money in one night bouncing than they did working in wrestling in 2 weeks. Eventually, Ole Anderson came into the bar and confronted Ed Sharkey because he saw a picture of Hawk and thought it was Animal, who had defected to Canada. Mike said, "No, that's not Animal, that's Hawk." And Ole says, "Hold on. There's 2 of these guys?" So Ole decided to book them as a tag team and brought them in as the Road Warriors. They were about to be catapulted into superstardom and eventually towards their own undoing. When they got there, it was surreal because they were young and green, which means green means they were new, they were inexperienced, and they were surrounded by big-name stars like Sergeant Slaughter and Tito Santana and Dusty Rhodes. Upon their arrival, Ole Anderson approaches his new tag team with a bold new idea. They hand them the belts and make them the champions right off the bat. And Ole says, if anybody asks, you won them in a tag team tournament in Chicago. He then gives them Paul Ellering as a manager. Joe picks the name Animal because Ole said he looked like an animal. Mike said, I think I'm a hawk. So that's how they came up with Hawk. Paul would drive them around in his van and was their manager in and out of the ring. He also would map out on napkins what they would do in the ring while eating at a Denny's. So Ellering literally structured how these guys would work in the ring. And that's how they came up with the formula for the Road Warriors. After about a month, Ole decides that since the villain in Road Warrior had a mohawk and shoulder pads, the Animal and Hawk would wear those to the ring. They also painted their faces, but did it in a way that helped with their facial expressions. Joe shaved his head to a single mohawk. Hawk shaved his head to a double mohawk, so when they press the top of their heads together, it looks like one big mohawk. As for the shoulder pads, Animal had a friend that worked for Honeywell, and he built the spikes that went into them. Now, Hawk would apologize in advance for the asking he would dish out. And Animal said as long as they didn't kick someone in the nuts or break someone's nose, nobody really got upset with how stiff they worked in the ring. And even though they dished out a lot of punishment, they were able to take it as well. WCW had a primetime spot on TBS. Most businesses in the early 1980s didn't have that. It was the first superstation to be broadcast across the entire USA. And Paul booked them everywhere. AWA, the Raju shows in Canada, Puerto Rico for Carlos Colon, and then the NWA. They went all over the world and weren't tied down to any one company. Basically, they went everywhere but the WWE during this time. The Road Warriors were one of the few tag teams that were main events every night in the arena. They never stayed in any one place, and it kept them fresh. Because they didn't stay in one place, when they came back, fans were happy to see them. So they never got stale. They always left before that could happen. Also, Paul never allowed the guys to get manipulated by promoters. So that way, promoters would never try to stiff them on pay or take advantage of them because Paul was always there to make sure of it. Wherever they went, the place filled up. Everybody in the business recognized that Road Warrior pop. It was so loud, Paul lost his hearing. Even to this day, if somebody gets a good cheer going down to the ring, it's called the Road Warrior pop. First trip they take to Japan, they go to do an interview. And in this room was literally 150 photographers and reporters from all over the country of Japan. There were more reporters there than when Michael Jackson came over to Japan. That's how big the Road Warriors got. Japan wanted them, and the Japanese people always liked to be scared, and the Road Warriors were entertainers as well as wrestlers. They loved them because they were ahead of their time, and they were nothing like the Japanese wrestlers. They didn't care who they fought, they were going to stop everybody in the country. Animal pressed Killer Khan, and the crowd was in shock. Khan was about 6'3", 6'4", and weighed 365 pounds. So he was able to press that guy over his head and slam him to the mat. That's insane. And of course, Hawk partied hard. He got involved with the Japanese mafia, and he would hang out with them, and they wouldn't see him for a few days. They were the type of people that if you pissed them off, you lost a finger. Thankfully, Hawk never lost a finger. As their popularity rises, promoters realize they aren't getting a run-of-the-mill tag team. They are getting rising stars with a guaranteed sellout crowd. Whether they were babyface or heel, they never had to change who they were. They started out as heels until they wrestled the Koloffs. The most memorable matches were the Russian chain matches they had. During those matches, they started getting USA chants and cheers from the fans. They were over so bad as heels, it made them great baby faces. In early 1986, Carolina-based Jim Crockett Promotions approaches the Road Warriors with an offer to headline their flagship event. Dusty Rhodes calls them up and says, "Hey, we got this idea for you, daddy." And the idea was a scaffold match, which had never been done on a national scale, and they faced the Midnight Express. Now, if you want to hear Animal talk more about the scaffold match, check it out on one of the links that we have with the interview, because we talked to Animal about the scaffold match, and he gives us a lot of great stories and details. So click the links below, pick the hosting site you want, check out our interview with Animal to learn more about the scaffold. Now, during this match, Hawk had a broken leg and was self-medicating with drugs and wrestling in a walking boot. His lifestyle started getting out of control. Animal started noticing it getting out of hand during the latter part of their NWA WCW run before they went to WWE. When it came to drinking, Hawk was a straight-up vodka on the rocks guy and also took muscle relaxers. According to Animal, nearly 85% of the guys that died early in the wrestling business were taking muscle relaxers. Animal was very disappointed in Hawk, and he didn't let people know it. He says it wasn't until the WWE years that it really started to get bad and caused some friction between them. The Road Warriors had conquered all of the wrestling world except the WWE. The pressures of performing in WWE would set the stage for their downfall. At the time they joined, Vince had just hired the modern-day Warrior, Kerry Von Erich, and he already had the Ultimate Warrior. So even though they were called the Road Warriors, Vince asked them if they could come up with a different name that they could use to call them. Also, secretly, Vince wanted something he could trademark. So Animal pitched the Legion of Doom, and Vince loved it. That way, Vince would trademark the name the Legion of Doom, and if the Road Warriors ever left, they can go by the Road Warriors in other promotions. So while people might not like name changes, they're actually a smart move working for WWE because it gives them something to trademark. The idea came from the cartoon He-Man and the Masters of the Universe, which lasted from 1983 to 1985. Hawk watched it all the time, and while they were in the car, he would make up stories that started with, "At the Legion of Doom," and he would just make up fucking stories. The WWE schedule was a grind, and you were 14 days on, 4 days off all year long. It's like your whole life is no sleep. Which, as someone who's done indie wrestling, I can fucking relate to that shit. I went through a 4-month period where I didn't sleep. The only difference is they were 14 days on, 4 days off. I had 4 days off, but they were once a month, which is why I'm glad I don't have that lifestyle anymore. Then you get in the ring, and all of a sudden you get an injury. Now there's no sleep, and you have to train. Meanwhile, the injury doesn't go away, and you have to perform. So now, all of a sudden, you take a pain pill. Mix that with the constant drinking, and it becomes a cycle. Now, it's hard for me to get mad at wrestlers who are addicted to pain pills. I went to wrestling school for 1 fucking day, and I was in so much pain, I could barely move my fucking body. So if I got that from 1 day of wrestling school, I can only imagine what the fuck these guys went through day in and day out. So if a wrestler gets hooked on pain pills, I can't really blame them. The other drugs, I think they're fucking stupid. If a wrestler gets hooked on cocaine or heroin or crack or some bull or meth or some stupid shit like that, then I look at them and go, "You fucking idiot." Pain pills, I give them a pass. I give you a pass if you were addicted to painkillers. Because I can relate. I can understand that. I can't relate. I've never been addicted to pain pills, but I understand needing a pain pill when you're in fucking pain. Anyway, Hawk's downward spiral eventually intersects with the Road Warriors' historic climb to the top, and in front of a record-setting crowd. More on that later. The Godfather owned a club, And Vince walked in and took everybody's finish that night, including the Road Warriors. Just for shits and giggles, because Vince is fucking crazy. Now, the Road Warriors were now doing pay-per-views and wanted to be top dogs on those pay-per-views. So there's a lot of pride that came with their work and respect that went along with it. But Hawk kept fucking things up. He would fail a drug test and be suspended for 3 months. And since Animal was his partner, he would be gone for 3 months as well. And that's the only disadvantage to being in a tag team and being in a solid tag team. If one partner goes down, the other one suffers. That's what you have to think about when you want to behave a certain way. When you're in a tag team, you don't just represent yourself. You represent your partner. So if you don't give a shit about your own life, at least have enough love and care for your partner's life not to do stupid shit like this. And Hawk was very outspoken about his abuse and didn't try to hide it. Then they go to Wembley Stadium for SummerSlam. And they are riding to the ring on motorcycles, which you can see in the thumbnail of this video. You'll notice them coming out to the ring on motorcycles. It was this event. And there were 90,000 people there for this pay-per-view event. Originally, the Road Warriors were supposed to wrestle for the tag team titles. They're getting ready for the show, and they're doing a run-through, and Vince is trying to tell them what they're going to do. And Vince gets pissed because Hawk keeps interrupting him, saying, "Vince, I got this idea." Animal found out later Hawk took Placidils, which is a hallucinogenic drug, and it lasts for like 6 hours. They went from the semi-main event against the Natural Disasters to wrestling Money Inc. on like the first or second match. When they got to the ring, they noticed Hawk is in no shape to perform. They wanted them to do their finish, but Animal said they can't because Hawk has no balance. He's going to fall off the top rope. When Hawk was sober and on, he was one of the best in the business. But on that night, he was inebriated, and they had to change the finish to Animal winning with a power slam. Animal was pissed because the match was bad, and he knew there was going to be a suspension. And that's horrible. When you bust your ass to get to the top of the mountain, and you're in that top spot, and your partner fucks it up, or someone fucks it up, by being inebriated, like the one night you need to be on top of your game, he can't fucking do it. I mean, look, there were a lot of wrestlers in the business who were on drugs and on alcohol, but very few of them let it affect the in-ring performance. It was usually outside the ring where you would notice this shit. You know, the ones who make it affect the in-ring, they're the hardest ones to have sympathy for. So the next day, they went to Hershey, Pennsylvania for TV. And Joe and Paul are waiting for Hawk to do interviews, and he hadn't shown up yet. Hawk later called Vince's secretary and said he quit. Animal decides not to chase after Hawk and embarks on a solo career. Animal decides to be a businessman and serve out the dates that they had left with WWE to protect their name in case they ever wanted to come back. Hawk was pissed and ended up working out his own deal in Japan. He took the gimmick over there and had Koski Sakai dress up in the face paint and spikes and calling himself the Power Warrior while they rode motorcycles around Japan. Animal was pissed, saying, "That's our gimmick." And here's the funny part. In the early 2000s, when Animal came back and him and Heidenreich got together and formed the new Legion of Doom, a lot of people were wondering about how this was disrespectful to Hawk, or they're spitting in Hawk's face, or all this other stuff, or whatever. And at first, I kind of saw that point. I kind of felt that way. But after hearing that Hawk did this in Japan, now I say, fuck Hawk, I'm glad Heidenreich did it. I'm glad they did that. Now, granted, Animal and Heidenreich had some issues while they were in that tag team, but I no longer see that as disrespectful to Hawk. Because if Hawk's not going to have respect for the gimmick, why should Animal? That's my question. He abandoned him in the heyday of their career to do the gimmick somewhere else. Now we're supposed to be mad that Animal does it with somebody else? Why? Because Hawk passed away? Hawk was a dick at that time. I don't blame Animal now for doing it. I don't. As far as I'm concerned, Animal was well within his rights. He had the right to do it. Hawk wasn't around. Hawk disrespected him in Japan. I don't blame him now for doing it in the early 2000s. I don't blame him at all. So anyway, Animal did his own thing. He wrestled a couple handicap matches and ended up rupturing a couple discs. Animal is home with an injury while Hawk presses on alone. And without Animal, he spirals out of control. Hawk was rushed to the emergency room on 3 separate occasions for drug overdoses. He had a head-on collision with an 18-wheeler and rolled the pickup truck 6 times with no seatbelt and walked away from it. So this guy was basically cheating death. His wake-up call came when he got hepatitis C. And apparently he's not the first wrestler to get that. There's a few others. I know Abdullah the Butcher had it or has it. And also superstar Billy Graham had hepatitis C as well. Now, guys in the business used to do crazy shit, like speedballing and mixing different drugs together and sharing needles. Now, I'm not saying necessarily that the people I named did that. I'm just saying Hawk was with a group that did that. He was on Interfero, which is the medicine you get for Hep C, and he eventually cured himself of the Hep C. But since the doctor gave him the green light to do whatever he wanted to do, he went back to drinking and partying. In 1997, a new opportunity arises in the WWE and is too tempting for either man to resist. However, the new contract comes with a strict insurance policy guaranteeing that they will make their matches. But then WWE introduces a third member to the team, 29-year-old ex-Denver Bronco Draws. They saw their real-life problems as something they can capitalize on. Vince proposes an angle where Hawk is portrayed as drunk and having habits on TV. He would stagger around the ring and often accuse Draws of trying to sabotage them, basically saying, "We don't need him, he's washed up." WWE takes the dominant part of your personality and just makes it bigger. They eventually kayfabe kick Hawk out of the Road Warriors. They had Hawk climb up the turnbuckle like he was going to kill himself, and Draws would go up to try to help him, but instead would push him off the Titantron. Animal didn't like the angle because it was too close to what was going on in real life. The fans also seemed to not like the angle. Once it's done, the Road Warriors decide to leave on their own terms. They went to Australia where Hawk kept partying because there was lots of booze, lots of broads, and Xanax was sold over the counter. Now, the way I see it, if Hawk is going to keep fucking up, you might as well make it a storyline on TV. That way, if he actually does fuck up in the ring, they'll think it's a work and not know it's a shoot. My philosophy is simple. You don't want people to make fun of you for something? Don't do it. You're already making an ass out of yourself when you go out there drunk or high. So you don't want people to make fun of you for being drunk or high or do a storyline about you being drunk or high. How about don't be drunk or high? Go to fucking rehab. Clean your ass up. I'm not saying it's easy to do, but fucking do it. Anyway, Hawk partied for 2 days straight on cocaine and muscle relaxers and ended up with cardiomyopathy. Hawk said he didn't want to die in this country and asked Animal to get him out of that hospital. They were brothers, so he helped him out. They left Sydney, got to LA, and then Hawk went to Tampa, and Animal said, "You're on your own now." Animal basically said, "I'm done with this." Animal then strikes out on his own. He eventually meets the Christian Power Team. He later went to this conference in Phoenix at the request of Nikita Koloff, and they brought Hawk with them, and he became a born-again Christian. He was baptized, and he gave his life to the Lord. From that point on, Hawk was clean and sober. He also married a gal named Dale. Hawk would say God has 9 lives, but he gave him 10 so he could give 1 to Jesus. And I know I've said some shit about Hawk in this video, but I want to clarify that the stuff I'm saying about Hawk, I'm talking about at the time that shit was happening. Obviously, Hawk got cleaned up. Hawk became born again. And people can judge that however they want. I look at it like this. If being born again is going to help you get your shit together, do it. If you're one of those people that uses Christianity or uses religion to better yourself as a person, then no one should make fun of you for it. The only people who deserve to be made fun of for being religious are the people who use religion to justify their shitty behavior. Those are the people that deserve to be criticized for religion or take religious scriptures out of context and try to use it to justify fucked up behavior. But if you're using it to better yourself as a person, there's nothing wrong with that. Then, while moving out of his house off the beach, he moved the last piece of heavy furniture out of the house for his wife. And then he said he was going to go lay down because he didn't feel well. And that's when he died. Animal got a call from his friend Bob Mueller while out in his backyard, and he told him about the death. He didn't die from an overdose, but the years of partying finally caught up with him and his heart stopped. And that's the case with a lot of wrestlers. There are some wrestlers who get clean, they get sober, they change their lives around, whether through religion or whatever, and eventually become better people. Unfortunately, those years of partying are going to catch up with you, and it does shorten your life. So, even though he did eventually get it together, it did eventually catch up with him, and his heart still couldn't take it anymore. But at least he didn't. At least he didn't relapse. That's the one solace we can all find in Hawk's death: the fact that he did not overdose. Then Animal calls Paul Ellering, and he takes the black van that they drove in when they first got together, spray paints it black to cover the rust, and drives to Tampa for Hawk's funeral. During his eulogy, Paul said, October 19th, 2003, the dark clouds covered the bright sun. Today, we lost our friend, our brother of planes, trains, and automobiles. Many miles, if I could steal a line from the outlaw Josie Wales. Hawk, it is good that men like us met in the struggle of life. All I got to say there is that's a beautiful statement, and it was a great way to end the documentary. It really was. Now, of course, I mentioned before, Animal was alive at the time this came out. He did eventually die of a heart attack back in September of last year, 10 days after his 60th birthday. So, Animal also died of a heart attack, but it was just a heart attack. It had nothing to do with drugs or anything like that, because Animal didn't take any that I'm aware of. Or if he did take drugs, it wasn't nearly as strong as Hawk, but I don't think he did. So I can't say for sure that he did or didn't. I just know it wasn't as strong as Hawk. But either way, he was able to stay alive for a long time. You know, Hawk died at 46, Animal died at 60. You know, and some people say 60 is still young to die. I don't know for sure. I just know that he lived a great life, and Animal was a pleasure to talk to. I would say nice things about Hawk, but I never met him. I just know that the Road Warriors, like I said, they were one of the greatest, if not the greatest tag team of all time. I know Elvis Delinsky from the Boochcast is a big fan of theirs, and I know a part of him would have wanted to be here with me to talk about this, but obviously because of scheduling issues, they weren't able to, so I had to do these myself. And I when you watch the Road Warriors wrestle as a tag team, it really makes you realize what a lost art tag team wrestling is. And there's always a part of me that hopes that tag team wrestling will get back to prominence, that there'll be a tag team out there that will be able to make that work. And the only team I've even seen come close to that is FTR. That's the only tag team I've seen that truly makes me believe that tag team wrestling can make a prominent comeback. Now, every now and then, I've seen some tag team matches that have looked good. And I've seen some tag teams that truly follow the tag team moniker. But right now, FTR is the best at doing it. And I hope that one day, in general, tag team wrestling will get back to prominence, and it can be a main event thing again, and it can be taken seriously again, and it can be well respected again. Because I know the day tag team wrestling gets back to prominence is the day that the wrestling business can truly honor the legacy and careers of the Road Warriors. And that, ladies and gentlemen, will conclude this episode of the Boochcast Reviews, Darkside of the Ring. Get ready for the next one, ladies and gentlemen. It's going to be, if you thought this was emotional, we're about to get even more emotional, because the next episode coming up is the final days of Owen Hart. And as I said before, we recorded that one a long time ago, so I already have it edited and ready to go. Desmond Dagenhart and Elvis Delinsky will be joining me for the final days of Owen Hart, so I won't be by myself, but it's still going to be a great, great listen as we get ready for Season 3, which is airing on May 6th. And for those of you who may not know the list, we talk a little bit about the list at the end of that episode, so you'll be able to see that there. And in the meantime, make sure you guys are following us on Anchor, Spotify, Breaker, Google Podcasts. The links are down in the description box. As I mentioned before, the link you click on will not only take you to the hosting site, it will also take you to the interview that we did with Road Warrior Animal. So pick your favorite, go there, listen to the episode of Road Warrior Animal, and while you're there, please follow the show so you can check out all the other great Boochcast content that we have on there. Our podcast is for wrestling fans as well as fans of other things. It's a bit of a variety show, but we mostly focus on wrestling. So if you're a big wrestling fan, this podcast is definitely for you. You should check out our interview with Road Warrior Animal, the late great Road Warrior Animal. Also, make sure you follow us on all of our social media platforms: Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Twitch, and Patreon. Support the show through Patreon. You guys know the spiel by now. All the links are down in the description box, so check them all out. And we'll talk to you guys next time. Until then, pizza, baby!